Hey everybody, welcome to Digital Painting with Mitch, and today we're going to be comparing a number of paint programs. As you can see, Clip Studio Paint, Krita, MediBang Paint Pro, Photoshop, Corel Painter Essentials, Fresh Paint, and even Paint and Paint 3D. Most of these programs you can get on multiple systems. I have a Windows 10 system, and so Paint and Paint 3D are Windows 10 only, and I think Fresh Paint is as well. Now, in this list that we have here, we can see that we've got a number of programs above the line and a number of programs below the line. The ones above the line are ones that I would consider to be more professional. They're not all ones that you have to pay for. Clip Studio Paint you have to pay for. It comes in two versions. The least expensive one I think is around $50 to $60. Krita is free, and it's a very powerful program. MediBang Paint Pro is also free. Photoshop comes in a couple of different versions. Photoshop Elements is around $100. You may be able to find older versions of it. Here I will be demonstrating here Photoshop Elements 10, but there's also the regular Photoshop, which is licensed. And so it is definitely the most expensive of the group that I'm going to be talking about. Corel Painter Essentials is the lesser expensive of Corel Painter. Fresh Paint, Paint, and Paint 3D. These are ones that can be very quick to use and easy to use for simple projects, or they can be more of what we would call the natural media focused paint programs, and they're just fun to use sometimes. And of course, Paint 3D is a little bit unique in the sense that it has the 3D aspect to some things. But I won't be focusing specifically on the 3D. I will just be using it because it is the default paint program with Windows 10. Now, just to let you know, my personal opinions, you may come to a different opinion based upon what you find, but my favorite is Clip Studio Paint. I think it's extremely powerful and inexpensive. Krita is also very, very good, but I just haven't used it as much, and it is completely free, so that is really good. MediBang Paint Pro has a kind of a strange name, but it is also free, and it is a very nice one. It's fairly new to the approach. Clip Studio Paint and MediBang their focus had been on manga kind of drawing, but the paint engine in Clip Studio Paint is really, really nice. Photoshop, just to let you know, I'm not a big fan. It is the most popular one because it's taught in a lot of schools, and it was originally the paint program, the one to go to. But it is very expensive comparatively now, and most of the other programs are actually easier to use in terms of they're more powerful, more customizable, and we'll show you some of that as we look at them. The other programs are ones that I just consider to be fun to play with, but for natural natural media type of approaches and traditional painting, these Fresh Paint and Corel Painters can be really, really nice. Okay, so let's get started. All right, so the first paint program that we're going to look at is Paint for Windows. It's the simplest, and it's not used for any really professional paintings, except for if you've got something very simple to do. It's nice if you want to just do something quick and easy. And of course, if you have Windows, you've got it there. Now, I'm not going to be walking through each of these programs, everything that you can do. I'm just going to be talking about the basics and showing its general theory of how it works. Or rather, to show you kind of the mindset of how the program is operating. Now, Paint, of course, is a good one to start with because it's the basics of any paint program, and you'll see that you've got these brushes that you can choose. So, for example, if you look at this one, it's a crayon, and as I draw on here, you can see you have that little bit of a texture. We've got a paint program, a paint brush there, a pen. Now, the pen here has a different style to it, and let's see, I think it's this one here that if you go I thought there was one that actually changed the width as you draw, but it's not in this program, I guess. Maybe in Paint 3D. But you can see this other brush has texture to it. So this is typical in Paint programs, that you have a set of brushes that have different attributes as you do paint down here. And here, for example, is the spray paint. Now, in Paint, you change the size of your brush by clicking here. So there's not really much option in terms of your ability to change the width of the brush. And of course, you change the color just by clicking on these different, let me change it to a different color here. Let's do the crayon, marker maybe. And we can paint over here. So now, if you look at the tools here, this is the basic approach for most Paint programs, in that you select a particular tool and you have brushes, but you also have specialized tools for text, zooming in. You have an eyedropper. Now that's very important for most Paint programs. If I click on that eyedropper, I can now change my color just by what I selected on there. Now in Paint, notice that the eyedropper goes away after I've clicked. That's common in all Paint programs. And then of course, eraser. You can erase. Now notice here we have a hard eraser. Other programs may have a soft eraser. And in this program, we've got a little bit of difference in the sense that a pencil is very different than the brushes, because a pencil is for you to draw just a single pixel. Now notice as I'm doing that, it looks very small, so I want to be able to zoom in. And here, the way I do this in Paint is I just click. Also, I can, at the bottom here, zoom out with this little slider here. But I can also go under here, under View, and click on these tools here, or even set it to 100%. Now, besides clicking on an erase tool and erasing, you may want to erase the entire screen. And that's done in different ways depending upon the program. In the Paint program, the way that you do it is select, and you can select all, or press Control-A, and then you press Delete, and that will get rid of everything that you have selected. So that's the basics of Paint. Let's now take a look at Paint 3D. So the first thing that you'll notice here is that the interface is quite a bit different, but it's still going to do the same basic kinds of things. Notice that instead of just having a brushes where you select the different kinds of brushes, you can see immediately the kinds of brushes that you're using, and they don't have a separation of that pencil tool from the rest of the brushes. But you just have your tools sitting right here, and you select them, and you start drawing or painting based upon the tool that you've selected. And the thickness is a slider over here, and you can make that adjustment. You can also adjust the opacity right here using the slider or entering in the box. And of course, you can see we can select the colors down to the bottom. Now to zoom and pan, we see that you have the standard scroll bars for panning around, and you can zoom in by doing that slider, so that's how they do things. But in addition, one thing that's very nice in Paint 3D that I wish other programs had is I can click on this little ellipsis here, and it says View More Options, and you see this Show Interaction Controls. Now we start to see some things that are a little bit different in more of the advanced programs, and you can see that I can pan with the mouse by pressing Alt and left clicking, or I can also pan by using the middle mouse wheel, and I can zoom in by using the middle mouse wheel. If I'm using the pen, I can do Alt and click and drag, and these are the kinds of things that are going to be more common in the advanced programs. And to clear the screen, we do the same kind of thing that we did in Paint, where we select, just drag over, and then press Delete. Not really the best way to clear things, but that's the way it's done here. I'm not going to go into the 3D kinds of things, but those are pretty fun. So if you've got Windows, you should give this one a try. Okay, so let's jump into Photoshop, the standard. Now, this one here is Photoshop Elements 10, so it's a bit older, but it's still the basic type of things that are in most paint programs today. And many other programs have copied a lot of things from Photoshop. Like I said, I am not really a fan, but it was good. It was a leader a while ago, but I just don't think it's nearly as good for digital painting these days. And the main reasons that I think it's not as good is, number one, it's slow to come up. Number two, you don't have, which is actually the biggest issue for me, you don't have the control to zoom in and zoom out, to rotate the canvas and things like that, and pan the canvas as easily in this program as you can. You of course can do it, but you just can't do it as easily in this program as you can in others. And of course, when it tends to be the most expensive program, just not very valuable to me. But in any case, this is not beat up on Photoshop. Let me just talk about the layout and how it works in comparison to other programs. But there are tons and tons of tutorials on Photoshop, so that's not my focus here on Photoshop. But since it is the standard, I just want to talk about that. And so as you look, the first thing that you'll notice is theming is a bit different, so it's darker. That's fairly common. And we should see a lot of tools here. So it still has this same kind of thing that we've seen before, more like paint actually, because when you select a brush here, that's how you select the different painting things. These other ones are special things, especially with photo editing and stuff like that. You can copy and clone things, but you see your eraser tool, the paint bucket, and you've got your color selector here. And this one, you just click on that, and now you can change the color. This is the different hue, and then you can get the saturation that you want. So once you've selected your brush, then you can just start your painting and change the color however you want and do painting. And of course, you want to have that eyedropper tool. So notice in Photoshop, we've got the tools of moving your image around, zooming in, panning, and the eyedropper tool, those key tools that we're used to. And I can just select, and notice that different, as opposed to paint, this eyedropper stays active as long as it's selected. So I can select the background colors or whichever color I want, and then I select my paintbrush and start painting again. Now the other thing that you want to see is up here in the upper left side, the actual type of brush that you can use. So as opposed to some of the other programs where you saw the different brushes, like in Paint 3D, where you saw the crayon and different things, it's this drop-down list where you can select different types of brushes. So they can have very different appearance to things as you put them out. And you've got another drop down here. This is the default set of brushes, but there's all different kinds of things. And you can have a pen pressure. So here, if you're going to be digital painting, I very, very strongly recommend that you're using a tablet of some kind in order to get the pen pressure control. Otherwise, you're really just kind of playing around, and you're not going to be able to create professional results digitally without that pen pressure. So with Photoshop, you can actually create your own custom brushes. I'm not going to go over that, but as you can see, there are just so many different brushes that you can use and try and get different effects. And this was really the incredible, powerful thing about Photoshop. In addition to these general tools, this ability to create these brushes and get all different kinds of effects was the thing that really set Photoshop apart in the beginning, especially. There are also selection tools as you look here. And these allow you to select portions of your picture. And so this is a very powerful thing to do that all the advanced programs will have very sophisticated things there, but I just want to show you where they are. To change the size of your paintbrush, you can see it's right next to the brush type here. And so we can click and then drag the slider and get different sizes that we want for our paintbrush. And again, in many paint programs, we just use the idea of a paintbrush as a general concept, and there's all different styles. So even if your style is really like a pen or a pencil, you're still considering it a paintbrush in Photoshop. Now, one other thing to show is as I come over here to the brush tool, if I right-click, then you'll see that I actually have different variations on that. So that can get a little bit confusing about which tool am I using and stuff like that. And as you'll see, most of these tools have, you can right-click and select different options. Now, the most powerful thing that is being introduced by Photoshop here that we haven't seen yet is the concept of layers. And this is really a must-have for anything that is beyond just playing around. As you paint traditionally, of course, you only have one canvas or piece of paper or whatever you're drawing or painting on. But in digital painting, you have many different layers that you can create, and you have these things called blending modes. So typically, as we see over here on this right side, we've got a set of layers here, and at the bottom you have something where you can create new layers and you can lock them and do things like that and adjust them. Let's just create a new layer, and so we can turn them off and hide things on each of the different layers. So I can now click on this second layer above, and let's change the paint color to a green color. We're not trying to paint anything beautiful. We're just showing you how these things work. And I'm going to go to my paintbrush, and let's just select default brushes and just a standard round brush, and we'll start painting. Notice that we have this layer on top of the background, and I can turn off the different layers. Let's go ahead and add another layer, and here I'm going to change the color again to a blue, and I'm going to paint on top of the green. But I can take this layer 2 and drag it below layer 1 and change the order of things. So I can do all kinds of very, very powerful things by having layers. So it is really critical to have the layers as part of your paint program. Now let me show you one more thing about layers, and I'm going to add another layer on top and do something very interesting here. Now notice in Photoshop, you can see here we've got these different colors here. There's a set foreground and a background, so I can just click on them and I can set those colors, but I can also click on this little icon part here and it turns it to black and white. So I'm going to do that for a second, and I'm going to just use the white background color, and I'm going to increase the size of my brush, and I'm going to, on layer 3, paint, well, we intended to select the white. Oh yeah, I forgot Photoshop does things a little bit differently, so I'm going to switch those. Let me cancel out, switch these, and so now I'm painting with white. So basically what's happening is in Photoshop you have to switch. You can't just click on the one that you're wanting to paint with. The one in the foreground, you actually use a special key to do the paint with the background color, but you have a foreground and background color. But I'm going to now paint white. That's all I'm trying to do here, is I'm going to paint white, and notice it looks like it's just erasing is what it looks like, but we're really painting on top. So if I hide that layer, then the other colors show up. Now let me also use, I'm going to switch now to the black, and I'm going to change the little bit of a color, a little bit of the size here on this pen, and what I'm going to do now is draw something, a black outline here. And that's just, we can kind of think of that as, a line drawing that we have. And so you might import that. And you see what this is basically showing as if you have a drawing that doesn't have transparency. So the background color, this white background color, is showing through and it's blocking what's behind it. Well, I can go and change the blending mode of the layer. Notice that it says normal here. Let me change that to multiply, and this is an extremely common thing that's done in digital painting. So I'm going to click on multiply, and notice what happens. Those very bright colors, the white in this particular case, actually becomes transparent, but the black stays opaque. And so this is a way that you can actually paint behind. So let me go ahead and add a new layer, layer 4, and actually put it right underneath layer 3. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the color, and let's change it to a yellow color, goldish yellow. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to increase the size of my little paintbrush, and I'm going to paint underneath, actually. So this is like I'm coloring, just, and better than a coloring book, I'm actually staying within the lines pretty much, because what happens is, even though I may not actually be in the lines, you see it's not really as smooth as you think. What's happening is this top layer is overlapping it. But notice over here, oops, I went outside the lines. Well, that's really easy. Just go to the eraser tool and just erase it. So that's a very easy way that you can go in and you can color by using the blending modes of the layers. And that way, you're what they call is non-destructive. I'm not destroying anything on layer 3. And I can get rid of that layer 3 and you can see what you have. And I can even turn that off. And again, so we've got all different kinds of things that you can do with layers. So that is really that, and the different brush types are the really powerful things that have to be in any quality program. So the last thing that I want to show is how we're going to erase things. And so I'm going to go here to the select tool again, and here we can select, or you can click select all, which is typically Control A, and now I can delete. But the thing that you'll notice is it didn't do anything. Why not? Well, again, this gets back to the layers, and we can see over here that layer 4 is the one that's selected. Let me go to the background, and now I'm going to delete. And notice it got rid of everything in the background, but it didn't get rid of anything on layer 1 or layer 2. I can select both of those layers and select delete, and actually I thought it would delete both of them. I guess in Photoshop Elements it doesn't. I'm not sure about the regular Photoshop. And I can delete on layer 2. But notice, even though I selected layer 4, notice that we can see this yellow, and if I turn it back on, we see it's not deleting it, and it's only going to erase what's in the background if it's actually turned on and made visible. So that's how you can actually erase what's on a layer. If I want to delete the layer itself, typically there's a trash can, and I click on the trash can and delete that layer, and it will ask me, do I really want to delete that layer? So there's all kinds of other more advanced things, but that's the basics of painting in most of the advanced programs. Okay, so let's switch over to MediBang Paint Pro. This is I think the newest one that I'm aware of on the market. You can see the cloud, so you can store your images out on the cloud. But if you look at it, it really has the same basic kinds of things. It's just more and more of the tools and that kind of thing, but the same basic types of things that you would have in Photoshop. But this is not just about dealing with photos. It's mainly now we're starting to focus more on just painting in general. But we can see over here on the left our typical toolbar. Notice it's a single layer here, and then here's our layers. And we can have a layer 1 and a layer 2, and brush sizes that we can just click on them. So that's a typical kind of thing. And then you can see a preview of the brushes. Now, as opposed to Photoshop had the brush drop down over here, the layout for MediBang by default is you have the brushes over here, and we can just scroll through them and can see G-pen. That's in manga, it's a very commonly used pen. Pencil, pen. They have different names, and you can see the different watercolor and acrylic, those kinds of things. But the tools are laid out in a similar fashion. Notice this is a paint bucket, but when I click on the paint brush, notice it has the same paradigm, the same way of thinking, that there's a single paint brush, and the rest of these are specialized tools. We have, of course, the eraser. And then at the bottom are the things that we manipulate stuff, that moving of the hand to move around, and then the eyedropper tool. So let's go ahead and select a paint color, and let's try to select some pen that might be interesting. Let's try the watercolor and see how that looks. And I'm just going to paint on here with red, and then change the color to blue, maybe some green. And now I can select the eyedropper tool, come over here, and I can select the different colors, and we can see. Now notice here that we also have a transparent color. So in this tool, you can actually paint with transparent. So you can, in essence, erase. But it's better than erasing, because erasing usually goes back to the background color. But it could be similar depending upon the program that you have. But that's a very interesting kind of thing. So you don't actually have to change the tool. You just essentially change the color. Now, notice a common paradigm that you will have now in the advanced tools is that I don't have to actually select this eyedropper tool to change the color. I mean, if I'm going to do that, I might as well just go to the palette, unless I'm trying to match colors. And then go back to the paintbrush and paint. So selecting the color, that was the foreground color. So notice that the eyedropper is going to select the foreground color, and I had the transparency selected. So that's something to pay attention to. So I want to select the foreground color, and then I'm going to use the eyedropper and select which color I want. And I can select a background kind of thing, but notice it will be white in this particular case. Again, go back to the eyedropper, and I'm going to select red. And then I have to switch back to the brush. So I don't want to really switch back and forth between these tools. And so what we can do in the advanced programs is, if I press a key, usually there's a key combination that I can select. So I'm going to press Alt, and now the eyedropper tool comes up just by pressing the Alt key. And you'll see that I can then select what other color, paint, Alt, and select a different color. And notice with this watercolor thing, I can blend. And so we can get purples, I can select a green, and I can kind of blend those in, select a purplish color here. And so that's a way that you can start to get these blending. Now we're getting into the things that you can do a lot more in real kind of painting. So in this case, again, we're using the Alt key to make that change. But in any case, the thing that I wanted to show here is the deletion of the layer colors. And in this particular case, as I draw, I'm drawing on layer 2 here. I can just press the delete key, and that's a very common situation. I don't have to actually select a particular region. I can delete everything on the layer. All right, so one other thing about MediBang Paint Pro that's interesting is that you have these reference lines that you can actually add to your drawing to make things easier. So that's a kind of really cool and unique feature. Some of the advanced programs have this, but that's something to play around with. The other thing to let you know is that all the advanced programs will allow you to customize your layout, and the advanced programs allow you to customize shortcut keys, control settings, and things like that. So those are powerful things I'm not going to go through right now. But notice here you can see layer, and it's got this these little icons, and I can actually make these go away. So for example, the brush size here, I can drag it over to the side. and now it's a floating window, so I can do that if I want. If I drag it on top, notice that the colors change, and depending upon where I drag to, I can change the order in which things are there. I can even click on the X and make it go away, but usually under Window I can see the different things. So for example here, brush size. Okay, so now let's take a look at Krita. The thing that is really most notable about Krita is your ability to change these brushes. And as I scroll down here, look at all these different brushes. And you can do incredibly powerful things with the brushes. I've actually created a tutorial already. You can look in my videos and look for the brushes. And it gets very complicated, very complex. But you can create your own icons for them and things like that. You can see some pencil tools and some paint brushes, erasers, and airbrushes, things like that. But that's extremely powerful. But as we have seen with all the other programs, it follows this same pattern. Now notice again, we have that darker theming, which is very popular, and you've got all of your tools over here. But again, it follows that basic paradigm if you pay attention to things, which is you've got a paintbrush, and with that paintbrush I can then paint on my screen, and I have a color selector here where I can select whatever color and change that. And of course I've got the eyedropper tool, but again, as we've said, I surely should be able to select the color just by pressing Alt and not having to go to that eyedropper tool. And if I want to change the style, again, I have this single brush selected, and then I just go and select a different style, let's say for the pencil. And notice here, the width of that item that I've selected could be different depending upon the tool that I've selected. Now, one thing that I will point out is that right here there is this tool that looks like a pen. So you would think that, oh, well, what's going on here? What's going on with that? Well, what this is, you have actually created a vector layer. So in Krita, you can paint bitmap or vector. So these tools up here are really vector tools. And I can actually select one vector item or another. So that's what these set of tools are. Even text is considered that kind of a thing. So that's not the pen tool in the bitmap sense, and it's a completely different kind of thing. So now you're getting into tools that actually have even different styles, vectors or bitmap, in terms of the layers that you can create. And of course it has the same standard kinds of things like how to zoom and pan, and you can do those types of things, grab that hand and move it around, or zoom in if I want to zoom into a particular area. And Control-Z typically to undo things. Krita also has that standard to erase on a particular layer. Just select the layer and press the delete key. The other thing that I want to show with respect to Krita is that underneath, when you configure things, like just like MediBang and the advanced programs that we're going to be dealing with, you can customize this arrangement, and that's a whole separate video. But specifically, I want to show you the place to go to for most of the things configuring. Underneath Settings, Configure Krita. Dockers are actually what we have for these little panels. They're called panels in other places, but in Krita they're called dockers. So you can see we've got the brush presets. If I get rid of that, notice it goes away, and I can go back in here underneath Settings, Dockers, and select Brush Presets, and it will show back up. And so we've got all the presets. Then it also, so underneath Configure Krita, underneath here is where you can do things that allow you to pan, zoom, or whatever, depending upon your key settings. So I can, for example, if I zoom the canvas, notice that there's all these different ways that you can zoom. You can use gestures to zoom if you have a touch screen. You can use the mouse button with control and the middle mouse will allow you to zoom, so you can drag. Or if you have a mouse wheel, you can wheel up or down. Or if I use my pen, I can do control space with my left button, in other words, just clicking. So I click and drag with control and space, and that will zoom. So that's how I can change rotating the canvas and things like that. So I don't even think Photoshop allows you to rotate the canvas itself, and I don't think, at least in Elements, you can't zoom in the same way. So now these are much more powerful in terms of the actual painting. So I wanted to show that. And notice that they, in the settings, that you have keyboard settings, display, you have just all different kinds of things that you can configure there. The other thing I want to show is that this thing at the top is called the toolbar, and you can select opacity and the size and things like that, but you can actually add elements to this toolbar. So that's in a slightly different place, settings, configure toolbar. So underneath there, we can see all the different, these are the toolbar items that are there that are available, and here's what the current one is. Notice we see new, open, save, and then clear. So all of these different things that you can add and remove them from the toolbar, so you can customize it however you want. So if you are on a budget or you're just starting with digital painting, I very, very strongly recommend that you take Krita and you start out with that. You can even do animation in this program. It won't have the sounds, I don't think. This is, we happen to be having, what do we have? This is version 4.1.5 is the one that we're looking at here. But it's free, it's easy to install, and it has extremely powerful features. And the documentation, you just click on Help, and go to the Krita Handbook, and it'll bring up the web, and it has really good, thorough documentation. So this is the one, if you're wanting to get started in digital painting but you're not yet sure and you haven't done it much, this is the program you want to start with. Okay, so let's take a look at Clip Studio Paint. This is actually my favorite. Let me go ahead and hide some of these other layers. I'll actually get rid of them now since we don't need them. Yes, I will delete these, and yes, don't show again because I know what I'm doing. Alright, so as we Clip Studio Paint, you can change the theming, you can change it. Now default it has a light theme. I actually prefer the light theme, but many people like the darker theme. And so you can change that theming color, and that's a very common thing. You can move all these elements around. So over here, I particularly prefer the tools on the right hand side. Under Clip Studio Paint, we can see that under Window, Workspace, that's the arrangement of things. So I'm going to change it to Illustration, and it allows you to register these things. So the way that I've got them arranged is what it means by registering. Do you want to register before importing? That's up to you. And then do you want to override all the other kind of settings? So here we have a different arrangement of the tools and elements. So I forgot that it actually, when you save a workspace, it actually saves the resolution. So since I'm doing a screen capture, I'm only showing 1280 by 720, so I had to resize. But what you can see here is if I select on Window, Workspace, I can quickly change to any different arrangement of all these different tools. So here I'm going to go to the one that I had registered, just saved, the Workspace. This is the way that I typically work. And I just click on OK because I want everything to be replaced. And notice immediately it has a completely different arrangement, the arrangement that I like. Now I'm going to go to the default one, Workspace. I'll reset to well, let's go comic and show you what that one looks like. That's a kind of little fun thing. And you can see it's just arranged differently based upon what I'm trying to do. So there's all different kinds of things I might be wanting to do, and I might want to have a different arrangement for each. Let's go back to the default. So if you have just purchased Clip Studio Paint, you might have an arrangement that's similar to that. But like I said, the way that you want to set it up, you can customize that however you want. So let's go back now to this basic default arrangement so you can kind of see things. So let's take a little bit of time on this one because Clip Studio Paint is my absolute favorite paint program. It is so incredibly powerful. And I started with it when it was Manga Studio, and when it Manga Studio 4 actually, and then when they went to 5, they changed the brush engine, and it just became so much better and so much more powerful. But it also has tons of tools, specifically for any kind of comic illustration. Specifically, that's about the frames, creating the different frames. But they have, and you have 3D models that you can import and everything else like that. There's just so much. It's such an incredible, powerful program. So it just blows all the other programs out of the water, in my opinion. Of course, you know, try it yourself. It isn't focused on natural media. So if you're really wanting to illustrate or use natural media, you might want to try Painter or some of the other things. But if you're just about the art, and the power, this is just incredible. And with great power comes great confusion. It is a little bit, the learning curve is pretty high on this thing. So looking at some of my tutorials, or just search the web for the tutorials, it's made in Japan, and so you do have the website and the manual, but it's really hard to understand what's going on just through the manual. It's a good reference manual, but it's a little bit confusing, especially if you're a native English speaker. And because it's so powerful, it has some different paradigms, a little bit different, and so it can be confusing a little bit. So I'll dive into more detail on that later in other videos. But in this video, I just want to show you the basics of painting and everything. So the first thing, of course, is to know that underneath Window, you can select all of the different palettes that in Clip Studio, they call them palettes. Some other programs, I'm not sure, Photoshop, they might call them panels, I'm not sure. Again, in Krita, they call them dockers. But they're basically these little groups of things that you can change. But you can turn them on or off. So if you get confused and you can't find something, Window is the place to go to. Now, of course, one of the first things that you want to find is your layer panel. So by default, it shows up right there. And that's where we create the layers. And of course, we can create a new layer and delete layers. And just like we did in any of the other programs, and you can change the blending setting and the opacity and all those kinds of things. And of course, the obvious thing that you can see here is the color wheel here. And I can use that just as we would expect for any kind of decent paint program. And so I just select the colors. Again, with the Alt key, I can do exactly like we've been talking about for the advanced ones, to select the particular color, including white if we want. So that's what you would expect. But if you look at the tool panel, it's a little bit different than what we might think of in this other programs. Yeah, we see our selection tools and the eyedropper over here, but we see lots of strange kind of things. So I see the paint bucket, and of course text, what we would expect to see. You can do vector, Clip Studio Paint allows you to do vector or the bitmap. But we've got lots of different things here. We've got a pencil and then a pen. We've got the magnifying glass, hand, and we've got lines. So now we've got a brush over here and a spray paint. So it's kind of like, well, it's not like most of the programs where you've just got a brush and then some other place where you select the different brushes. It's got, but it's not just like Paint 3D where you, if we remember in Paint 3D, you just had the different types of brushes like that. So it's a little bit different. Now, what's happening, what this is about, is that these tools right here are really just groups. And if you can see, when I select on this, what's called the brush, I have lots of what we would call sub-tools. So in Clip Studio Paint, they're called sub-tools. And what they are is they are very specific characteristics of things like a brush size, density stabilization, lots of these different properties, the blending kind of capabilities, the texture map that's associated with these tons and tons of different kinds of things that make them look like watercolor or oil paint or India ink. Now these different things here, they come in a default, they have these names of oil paints, but they're really just groups. So you kind of have groups within groups. So in this paintbrush, this brush kind of category, I have this watercolor or oil paint or India. This is, again, just grouping because we've got this opaque watercolor and these different types of brushes that we can select, and they will have different, let me use a different color here. They will have different appearance based upon, you know, the one that you select. Okay, so let me just take a little bit more time to explain a little bit about what this is about. Again, it's all just grouping. So let me show, for example, this emphasizing texture. Okay, so it's emphasizing the texture, and what's happening is there's a texture on the background and it's emphasizing it. So this particular pen, brush, tool, whatever you want to call it, has these characteristics. And it happens to be within the watercolor group, the watercolor subtool, that's inside the brush tool. Now I can just take this and I can drag it wherever I want. So for example, I can go and drag it into the oil painting. And so now, if I click, it's gone out of watercolor because I took it to a different place, and now we're using a watery. It's a different tool. Let me go to the oil paint, and there's that emphasizing texture, and now I'm back to the emphasizing the texture. I can take that and I can move it into the thing that looks like this pastel view here. Okay, it's the pencil group. So let me go back to my brush, and we see this emphasizing texture, and I'm actually going to drag it and drop it on top of the pencil. So let's go ahead and do that, and it becomes a red square around there, and I let go of it. Now again, I had moved it from the oil paint, so now it's going to select whatever the next tool is, and we see it's you know, not the emphasizing texture. Let's go to the pencil has now changed to what looks like a paintbrush. And that's because this emphasizing texture is thought of as a paintbrush, and so it has a little tool that looks like a paintbrush. So I'm going to go on here, and when I select that, the emphasize, it's a separate subtool within this brush, and I can actually drag that actually into the pencil itself. Now notice here, if I select this header, it just allows me to reposition things. But if I want to move the tool, see the tool is here, and if I want to move it into the pencil group, I'm going to put it into that pencil group, and now it's showing up in the pencil group. But notice that its icon is a paintbrush icon because this particular tool is considered to be like a paintbrush. Now if I click on rough pencil, its tool is considered to be a pencil. And so I can actually have groups that change their kind of look in this main tool palette based upon what they are here. Okay, so again, the rough pencil is a bit different. And then I can change the brush size here. Notice that kind of thing. And all these different properties, depending upon what tool I have selected, these properties will change based upon what I've got selected. Okay, so let me show one more thing about this. Let's suppose that this emphasizing texture, I actually consider it a pencil, and I don't want it to have that paintbrush kind of look to it. Well, I can't change that directly. If I click on this little wrench here, I can see lots of things that I can change. And I click on these things and we can see the different stuff going on. But if I want to change this icon, what I need to do is in this subtool, there's a menu, and I click on that, and what I want to do is duplicate the subtool. Or actually, can I change? Yeah, I can change the settings of the subtool. So here, what we've got here, this tool icon, I can actually create my own icon. And it's currently set as watercolor. So I can change that to just about anything I want it to be. So let's say that I consider it a pencil. I'm going to change it to pencil, and I'm going to select OK. And now it looks like a pencil just like the other pencils. So let me stop with that and just basically say that what is going on here is that Clip Studio Paint is allowing you to customize this however you want. And so if you think of things as pencils and pens and paintbrushes, you can organize all of your tools in that way, and you can assign little icons so it's easy to see. And you can have, you know, pencils and then select your pencils, and pens and select your pen, and paintbrushes or spray cans or whatever. Or if you wanted to, you could take all of your pencils and drag them, and your pencils and pens and paintbrushes, and drag them all into one group, and you could make this look exactly like Photoshop or Krita or the other paint programs that typically have just the brush tool. And even though this toolbar right here is not that big, it's the subtools. This is layers upon layers upon layers of tools. And just to show that, let's click on this line here. And notice now you've got things like these frames that are for manga if I want to actually create different frames. And we've got all of these different saturation lines, streams, direct line drawings. And again, each of these has like rulers here. We've got linear ruler, curve ruler, figure ruler, ruler pen ruler. So there's really tons and tons and tons of tools that you can actually group however you want. So again, the summary of what I'm saying about this is that these tools, the paradigm is a little bit different. You don't just have one set of tools that somebody else is telling you how to do. You've got them in ways that you can group them however you want. Okay, so the final thing that I want to talk about with Clip Studio Paint is if I want to make changes to things, again, the most important thing that I want to think about is this workspace. And registering workspace is when I want to create a new one. Okay, and I can reset, and you can play around with these different things. Again, this is the default layout. Now if I want to go to, let's say, the illustration. I guess that was pretty much similar. If I want to go to workspace, comic. Okay, like I said, this is pretty powerful and confusing, but I forgot that basically, if I reset to default, it will rearrange things. So if I want to get back to the original, the key thing here is registering workspaces. So if you've got Clip Studio Paint, you need to become familiar with this if you actually switch workspaces a lot. Once you have actually set up your workspace, it will just keep it however you left it. But if you switch between them, you need to understand what this register workspace is. So when I register a workspace, so if I click on this, let me go ahead and do something here. I'm going to move this subtool over here. Just drag it there and move that one right next to it, something like that. So let's just say that I had a different arrangement. At that point in time, if I've got it set up the way I want to go on here and register that workspace. So I'm going to call this crazy because it's not something I would want to have. But I've registered that workspace, and all of this kind of information, as you take a look at that, is going to be saved. So I set OK. Now I want to go in here, and I can now select between those. I can manage those workspaces. Again, you see them. I can delete them, change the name of them, whatever I want to do. But the key point is I can go back to the different workspaces just by clicking. Now notice, if you recall, this workspace that I call Workspace, let me go ahead and manage workspaces, and I'm going to give it a better name. Let's call it Mitch, so we can easily see. Okay, so this workspace actually was a different arrangement. It had the tools all the way on the right, and it's like, oh, what's going on here? And that's because while I was using Mitch, I actually reset it to the default. So for example, let me go to Illustration. And notice you probably can't see everything. So I have to actually drag this back down and put it back in the screen position. And so that's what resetting does. It brings it back to its original thing. So let's go to Mitch. And it has that default appearance. That's because that was the last state that it was in. But if I want to get back to what it was like when I originally set it up, when I registered it, if I want to get back to it, at the time that I actually registered it, then I go to reset. That's what the reset does. So I'm going to reset Mitch, and it goes back to that original orientation, you see? So let's walk through that one more time. Workspace. Now I'm going to reset to default. So this is called the Mitch workspace, and I can reset it back to default. In other words, what Clip Studio Paint has as the default. And so they're initialized. And so now it thinks, or it has set up that Mitch is going to have the arrangement of the default arrangement. Okay. So if I register that, then that will be a kind of a saved point, if you will. But I really want to go back to the original, so I'm going to click on Mitch, and there was my original. This is how it was when it was registered. So it's very important to understand about registering a workspace, and that will allow you to get back to these different arrangements. Here's that crazy one, or the illustration one. So it will arrange things. So this is a very key point, is that you want to understand, get everything set up the way that you like it, and then when you do that, register that workspace and give it a specific name. So that's a very important thing to do in Clip Studio Paint. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you with Clip Studio Paint is that under File, under here you can set, just like in Krita, you could configure. These are the places where you can set all different kind of thing. They call it command bar settings, but most other programs call it Toolbar. So this is where you would customize your toolbar under this command bar settings. The modifier key settings are the keys that as I'm painting with my pen, if I want to rotate or zoom in and out, or rotate the picture, or pan the canvas, if I want to do those just by pressing a key and dragging my mouse, that's where I would set it up here underneath the modifier key settings. Of course, there's shortcut key settings. Those would do things like if I press a key, it's going to select a tool or something, and then just general preferences. And there's a whole pen pressure settings. So underneath File is where you will find all those customization options. Okay, so that completes the overview of the programs that are really focused on the most classic type of painting programs, similar to Photoshop, and what I consider much better than Photoshop. Now let's take a look at a couple of ones that are more natural media type of programs, and let's start with let's look at Fresh Paint. That's one that's free for Windows, but it is really kind of interesting. Quite a bit different, but it's fun. So let's take a look at this, and here's how it starts out. And so the paradigm is a little different, so that's why it might be a little hard to kind of understand what's going on there. So let me first clear the screen. And the way that you would do that is if I look at this palette here, and if it goes away, you can just click on it. See, it's got this little palette icon there. And what I will do is I'm going to click on the canvas, this easel here, and there is this little remove the colors from your palette. And I click on that, and that erases my screen. Now there's another thing here that we'll look at in a later video, but this allows you, Fresh Paint doesn't have multiple layers, but it kind of has a layer. So for now, you really need to think of Fresh Paint as just having really no layers, and you just paint on it. In a later video, when we talk about workflow and stuff, I'll show, or when we talk about coloring a picture, I'll show this a little bit more detail. But I just click on the paintbrush to see all my paintbrushes, and if you look closely, what you'll see is there's actually 3 categories, and there's a divider sections right here. So what you have is on the left hand, these are watercolor paintbrushes, and in the middle are oil-based paintbrushes. And you can kind of see that. Notice these colors here, they look watery when you select these paint brushes over here, and you can see the coloring up here. So that's kind of nice. It gives you that kind of feel. The middle ones are oil. See, they're thicker and they look like oil. And then on the right are your pencils and pens and pastels and that kind of thing. And so when you select the category, then you have different types that you can select. Notice that you've got a pen, you've got this crayon and the pastel, and you can see what they will kind of look like. Okay, so let's just draw a little bit. So we've got a regular 4H pencil, and you see as I draw on this thing, and as I'm drawing, this may get in the way or whatever, but I can just make it go away, and I can draw. Can bring it back and get a different kind of pencil. Okay, and I can change its color. Now let's take a look at this kind of a crayon type of tool. So I'll just draw over here so that you can kind of see it. Now my color picker is right here, and I can just take that and drag it wherever I want, and it will select the color of interest, and it just kind of goes away as I paint, so I can paint wherever. and then when I stop painting, these things pop back up. So it's a little bit different way of doing things. And notice that they blend. So let's pick some white here and blend so that here we've got some blending. You see? So here's another paradigm that's different with the natural brushes, wet and dry. So while I'm painting these, it's wet, and that allows me to blend. But if I do the fan, it will dry it out. But before I do that, let me go to a pencil, and I'm going to change that size, increase the size a little bit, and let's give it a yellow color so it's easy to see. Now I'm going to try to paint on top of these colors and see what it does. You see, that kind of is painting almost on top, and it's not really blending with it. It's kind of painting on top. So the tool that you choose makes a difference. Let's try this one here and see how that looks, and so you can see how they blend. But like we said, if I want to dry those paints, again, we've got some of the blending going on here. If I now press the fan, it'll spin around, and so now as I dry, it's all dry, so it paints on top. Now again, you've got these. Here's what let's look at the oil paint. So, or excuse me, the watercolor. So let's do the oils real quick, and I'm going to go ahead and clear my canvas here and go back to the tools, and let's paint. And look at this. Interesting. Let's increase the size of that, and we can see now another thing that's very good and interesting about this. If you have the windows, if you're doing digital painting, I'd strongly encourage you to look at the touch sensitive and the built for Windows ink types of computers. I have a Cintiq that I'm using here, but there's 2-in-1 laptops and the Surfaces and things that are really nice. Let's take a look at this. I'm going to select that paintbrush and watch as I go here and I just click. Notice, let me increase the size a little bit here. Notice that it is pointing in the upper left. Now I'm going to tilt my pen or point my pen in another direction, and look what I get. It points in another direction. Now I'm going to point it down, and it gives me a different thing. So what this is doing is, as I'm dragging it around, it will change its orientation based upon the pen tilt. Now, that is a control in the other programs. It's not limited just to natural painting media. This is something that if you have these the tablets, you should be able to set those properties in the other programs. Now, the next thing, let me go ahead and paint a little bit here. All right. The next thing I want to show is up here. There's this water. What is that? It says clean the color from your brush. Well, that's just like dipping your paintbrush in the water. Why would you want to do that? Well, like we said, there's wet and dry. So now let me come over here and look, I can kind of blend these things. So I'm not adding color, I'm just blending the color by dragging it, and I can, blend them together. And so that's what that is, and it's there whether you're using a watercolor. So let's kind of look at the watercolor, and let's give it a how about red? Let's find some red or something. So I can click on here and I can select different colors. Okay, so let's paint here. Make it a bigger brush. So that's the kinds of things that you can do with this, and it's really, really very interesting. So that is fresh paint. And to get back to fresh paint, this is the arrow is the back brush, and then you've got different tools. So the paradigm is quite a bit different than the other ones, and it's more like you're just really painting. Has that look and feel. Okay, let's take a look at Corel Painter Essentials. The newest version is 6, and I think it's about $50. But it's very nice for creating a natural media type of appearance for the paintbrushes. So it's going to have the same standard tool layout. It's nice and neat, and they only have a single brush, so there's not pens and pencils and all things like that, just a single brush. And then, like Photoshop up in the upper left, there is the brush selection. And if I click on this little triangle, you can see the different categories such as oils, airbrushes, chalks, pens and pencils, and then you just select the one that you wish to use. So, and then you can see the recently selected ones, so that's what makes things a little bit quicker. So, of course, like all the other packages, I can have this color wheel and select a color. One interesting thing that you might want to know is that to move this color wheel, you can actually change its size. If I move out to the edge, I see this little plus kind of symbol, and that allows me to change the size of the color wheel. If I want to actually move the color wheel, what I have to do, it's not very intuitive, and that is I need to click inside this region between the circle and the triangle, and now I can move that. Now, like all the advanced programs, if I press Alt, I can select the different colors and paint with them. Your different canvas manipulation tools are down here to the side. For layers, you, again, like most of the other programs, if I go to Window, I can select the different things that show up. And layers, by default, it shows up in this palette over here. It's not usually there. So you can just add it and remove it by clicking in the window. And just like in the other packages, there is a button where I can add new layers. So I can add a new layer. Here, this button, the other one, sorry, is different layer commands, but here is where we add a new layer. And so now I can select a different type of tool. Let's try acrylics and oils. Let's try the dry bristle. An interesting thing here with this is that when I start, let's do yellow, it will be loaded with paint and then it dries out. So the different paint brushes, the paint runs out. So that's kind of an interesting effect. Now, unlike some of the other programs that we've been looking at, like Krita and Paint Studio, you cannot customize this. You can a little bit, but you can set some preferences. But there's not really that many preferences that you can alter. So it's not like Clip Studio or Krita where you can basically customize anything. The last thing to show is to delete things. It's a little different in the sense that I have to go back to that standard way of doing things where I select all, I can use the Control A, and then I press, I can't just press delete, I have to go to edit, clear. And I think that the backspace actually does that. So yeah, the backspace allows you to clear that layer. So select all and then use the backspace, not the delete key. Okay, so that's been a long video, but hopefully you see quite a number of different programs and how you can use them in their very basic operations. Check out the other videos for more detailed discussions of things. Have a good day.